Welcome to R&R Showtime with Robert
and Ryan.
And today we will be talking about the season review of The Legend of Vox Machina.
And what a season it was.
Indeed. It's funny, before we started the podcast, I said to Ryan, what can we really talk about this show that we didn't already address in the first one we did about it, and basically just sit here and say lots of good things about it?
You also had said that before watching the last episode.
Yes, correct. But just forewarning, we're just probably going to say a lot of good things about this series. It was exactly as good as we expected after the first 3 episodes.
Yeah, so we'll try not to retrace the same things that we already said before. But so overall, now that we see the whole season and we see how things changed, how things more or less stayed the same, how do you feel having finally gotten the Briarwood arc we were promised like 3 years ago?
Letter grade, and I recognize that there is bias in this, that I did watch the show before. However, trying to even be objective about it, but basically A+.
Same.
Being objective about it, trying not to be so like recognizing my bias and trying to think like maybe it's not that good, maybe it's this and that. The worst I could do is an A, even then.
Yeah.
I literally just think to myself, maybe the humor is a little too crass, but it's just all, I can't really say that it's crass. I mean, like you'll know from the first episode it's crass, and if you don't like that kind of thing, then don't keep watching. But
see, I feel like there have been examples of taking fantasy and being like crass and crude and modernized about it, but this still treats it as high fantasy while having characters behave in ways that are believable to the setting. And that's the interesting thing. Like one of the things that I like about the adaptation the most is in the D&D show, Scanlan would do songs, but they were always like parodies of modern pop songs. And I feel like that would have been the lazy way to just sort of like get rights to parody pop songs throughout this. But instead we get like Scanlan originals and stuff.
Yeah. Which, I mean, like Scanlan doing those, or sorry, Sam Riegel doing those songs were funny for him, and in some ways, I assume, funny for the audience. At a certain point, he recognized that he was on film and, trying to be amusing. But again, like they weren't always appropriate. So I think it was just an excellent choice too. Like you said, make original songs. Man, it's just so well done. The story is so good. One of the things that, like, I might have even said this in the first one, but throughout the series, I think they very perfectly do something that I was like worried about, which was how do you continue to have like such power, but also like it be measured like, bullets and arrows and swords and like lightning bolts all should do some amount of damage, but like our heroes who are seemingly vulnerable like have to be able to overcome that, right? And there's a right amount of like them doing these powerful things and getting a little bit damaged. Like I like that they are humanized and that they get stabbed and shot and like are wounded and things. But luckily, I mean, like magic just kind of explains it away. It's not hard to be sometimes when I watch different medias, right? A complaint that, hey, spoilers ahead for the Wheel of Time. I'm just going to make like a small reference to something that was very upsetting about it. The Wheel of Time series, a thing that upset me and some other people is that at a certain point in the show, they exhibit some healing magic. And the healing magic that they exhibit sets essentially a precedent for how powerful their magic is. And basically, it's untrained person can heal person back from the dead, essentially. That this person is, as far as we can tell, dead.
And that kind of removes all what's the word?
All
not
drama. Yeah.
But there's a better word. All suspense.
Tension.
Yeah.
But it sets like a rule, right? In these fantasy settings, the thing is we need to understand like what the rules are and how powerful things are, so we can suspend our disbelief and say this is what they can do and here are the limits. And in Vox Machina, we see without them like putting any specifics on it, we see that there is a limit to healing, right? Like they can't heal death, which in D&D, they actually did have like
at this point in the campaign, there, I believe through the Briarwood arc, people did die and they just brought them back.
Yeah, they in D&D, they literally have spells at this point that can not only bring somebody back like right in the moment from death, but like even later. And it's definitely a thing in the original series that people are just brought like, oh no, they died. Like, let's just get them back to where we can get a diamond and bring them back to life.
Yeah, at this point in the campaign, like most of these, like a good amount of these characters have already died.
Yeah, multiple times.
Not multiple times. At
I
this
guess
point.
not multiple times each, but yeah, multiple of them as well.
Yeah.
But you were correct. But yeah, and so we see that without like putting some kind of hard and fast limits, that there are limitations to their power, but also no limits in some ways. Like we can see that they can continue to do new things that we don't see, but it's never outside the bounds of what we would expect they could do. And that Wheel of Time thing was one, as a person that also read those books and knew how powerful they should be, what that set was a precedent for like someone that's not not supposed to be that powerful or trained to be able to do such high level magic. It basically leads me to think, oh, so this should just be something anybody can do, right?
Yeah.
And the contrast there between these two things, right? This world over here sort of set me up with some rules and expectations, and then basically just ignored them for the sake of some moment. Vox Machina set expectations for what their power level was, demonstrated that people are vulnerable and can die, but also that there's the capacity to fix those things.
Yeah.
And was not afraid to just kill people. Like people just literally get like annihilated. Boom, arrow to the face, like head stomped, sliced in half. Like
and the way that they like treat like Vax healing Keyleth, and what he does is he does a combination of following the technique he saw someone Keyleth use to heal someone before, combining it with someone's magic, because he himself at this point does not have any magic himself. So he uses those things combined to create the effect of being able to heal a person, and it feels earned and it feels like it makes sense without like making Vax, oh, now Vax can heal whoever he wants. No, he needed someone's magic and he needed these herbs that existed in someone else's bag.
Yeah, and it's a callback, right? Like we did have a moment where he saw literally what she did, and then he said, oh, I remember what she did. And then, like you said, somebody else added their magic, right? It was a combination of things that were already established, and that sort of makes sense. Because they didn't make a hard rule on what they could do, it was totally believable to say, oh, they could do that.
So I did have a brief conversation with someone who watched the show, had not watched the campaign, and they did point out that they felt like the band of people had a bit of plot armor, which I feel like is kind of valid at this point in the show, at least. Without spoiling what's to come, they don't necessarily all have plot armor throughout the entirety of the show.
I will say, you bringing that up, that is a totally valid criticism, though. It's a valid criticism, but I think that, here's the thing, is that you think of any story that's told with a hero or multiple of them, they always have plot armor. It's always like, oh my God, at the very last second, thing happens. That was, if you're good at storytelling, you set up the thing that happens. So it doesn't just Deus Ex Machina, something comes out of nowhere and rescue them. It's something, you saw the ball rolling before it got there. But I think in this, they make them vulnerable enough and put them in positions where I think that it might be a little too critical to say plot armor, but it's valid. And I think with its roots, they in some ways do, like if we think about what the roots of it are, that they had way more healing magic and literally being able to bring each other back from the dead, and like what it looked like in D&D is that like the joke is tossed around in the original Critical Role show that we're basically gods now.
Yeah.
And like that's how it is in D&D sometimes. You get more powerful and you are practically unkillable.
Yeah, unless you're facing off against someone like so big and so powerful that he wipes you all out before you can heal. Like you just go in unprepared or you get tired out and stuff.
Yeah. And so I think that they handled it as well as they could. But I still do say that claiming plot armor is reasonable.
Yeah, but there's plenty of shows where the main cast doesn't die, and that's not an issue.
Yeah.
So I feel like Game of Thrones has made it so that fantasy shows have the need to kill people for it to be dramatic. And I don't necessarily think that's true. I mean, even Lord of the Rings technically killed off people for drama, but not that many, and not the main people.
I mean, I think I appreciate the subverting of my expectations, right? There is an expectation in many fantasy or just like stories with heroes that the hero is going to get, no matter how hard, deep and bad and ugly it gets, something's going to save them or something will come and they'll be rescued or they'll rescue themselves. And it's great to have your expectations subverted. Game of Thrones did a great job of introducing that and saying, no, sometimes that person you like just dies and they stay dead. But this is just not that story, and I don't think coming into it with that expectation, you shouldn't come in with that expectation at all. Because then you will have your expectations defeated, not subverted.
I'd say so. Something I can't remember if we touched on this the last time, but I feel like an easy show to compare this to, despite them being quite different genres, would be the show Invincible, because it's another animated show on Amazon Prime where there's a lot of like gore and like it's like unexpectedly violent for the genre as it set out. Like you see animated superhero show, you don't expect it to be as violent as Invincible. You see animated fantasy show like set with dragons and stuff, you don't expect it to be as gory as Vox Machina is. And so I feel like they achieve a similar effect in that vein. But with Vox Machina, I feel like the violence of it feels a little bit more genuine to the world, whereas like the Invincible show to me almost felt like the way that it's utilized in the first episode almost felt like it was being gratuitous to like just to like shock value sort of thing, whereas in Vox Machina I never feel like any of the stuff is like so gratuitous.
I think they set our expectations a little bit by making Vox Machina humorous, and because it's humorous, it's humorous and it's a fantasy setting, so it's almost easy to accept that the goriness and the just absolute like murder of it. Whereas Invincible is set to be some sort of realistic world, right? With superheroes, and so like the death in that because there's not a like the graphic nature of the death is. Because there's no humor to punctuate it, is just, it seems gratuitous.
And if you're talking about plot armor too, like Invincible, the character Invincible, the main character, has a lot of moments where it feels like, okay, the reason he's not dead is because he's the main character and he can't die.
Yeah.
Like there are several points where he's pretty much dead.
Yeah.
Like other than he can't be dead.
Yeah. And honestly, like even in Vox Machina, they try to raise the stakes a lot. Like, okay, as much as a hero can have plot armor, they still do literally put them on the brink of death and like put them on the ropes and knock them out of the fight. And, Keyleth lay dying at certain points. How many other people like the acid room, Grodd's literally like melting and only because of healing magic that's being beamed at him is like not literally just dying.
Yeah.
I think they do enough to maybe as much as a hero has plot armor, they defeat that and make the stakes.
The other
reasonable.
person that almost died was Cassandra.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which, let's talk about that. I feel like Cassandra as a character, I knew that she was going to have the heel turn, that she was going to betray them. And even knowing that, when it happened, it felt like, ooh, like I knew it was coming, but like the moment it happened, I did not necessarily realize that that was the moment occurring. And so it felt a little better to see it. And also to have the validation, like it's smart to show off that she has the eye glimmer and that the betrayal was not a legitimate betrayal. It was a mind control betrayal.
A manipulation, like you have been controlled and like sort of impelled to believe this idea.
And like, really, we should have, it's weird that you don't go into it expecting that she's under mind control this whole time, because in the show, we actually have her established the Briarwoods coming to her and telling her like, oh, your brother's here or something like that. And so like, why would we not expect her, like, when they find her, she's in a different place than she was when they come to her. So clearly they put her there for them to come get her.
Yeah. On the same line, I basically, agree with what you're saying right there. But it makes me think of something that I thought of while I was watching this. When you talk about Cassandra, I think about Percy, right? And obviously this arc
is Percy's arc.
Yeah. Is Percy's arc. I mean, and through Vox Machina, a lot of the characters get their own like moments. Almost, not necessarily their own arcs. Like this one was like Percy's literally a whole story. After this, like Percy doesn't actually have like to say a purpose in adventuring other than just stay with his friends.
Yeah, he has a development that gives him a reason for being around.
Yeah. But I have to say that this show takes what was in Critical Role and actually makes it what I think Taliesin and Matt would have hoped for to be in the best respect. I want to say that while the story was great, what the background story that Matt created, the idea of like, taking what maybe he said, I was like, my family is slaughtered and I'm out for vengeance kind of thing. And however they interacted or worked together to build that, Matt did an amazing job. However, there were many of these scenes that we see depicted in Vox Machina did happen in Critical Role. But when we saw them there, they were pretty cool for the moment. But some of in my opinion, from my memory, were kind of contrived.
One thing I'll note is like all of the like people on the gun other than the Briarwoods that Percy wanted to hunt down and kill, all of them didn't feel like we get like brief descriptions from Percy saying why he wants this person dead. But in the show, we get to see why Percy wants these people dead. And so when he kills them or when he doesn't kill them, it feels more like there's more weight to the character being killed by Percy or not being killed by Percy, being spared.
Yeah. And the thing is, in Critical Role, we did not get all these like glimpses and glimmers of like Percy like having some kind of sinisterness and like the smoke thing until like very like when it just like there were like a few singular moments and you're like, something's kind of going on with them. And then it was like, whoa, big deal demon thing going on. It all kind of came almost out of nowhere. And it didn't have the kind of like foreshadowing that is necessary for good storytelling.
Yeah.
This show like perfectly does what is necessary to actually make it a good story. Like they foreshadow it. They show us the slow corruption, how it's slowly taking over him. So we don't just kind of, in Critical Role, it was almost a little bit of blindside where we're like, oh, Percy's story involves like a demon, a smoke demon now or something. So I think they did such a good job to like actually elevate this. Like watching it here is better than having watched it in Critical Role.
Yeah. Another moment, which is kind of like a notable moment in the Critical Role show that's brought to the screen, is when they come to Whitestone and they see the bodies of like 7 individuals dressed up like Vox Machina as basically an intimidation thing, including 2 people the size of a gnome, which are 2 children. And the way that it's played out in the show is like, it was dramatic in Critical Role, but in the show, it's teased out with a little bit of getting to see those people alive.
I did really like that where it was like the kids like they're like, oh, you've been picked for a very special purpose, and the kids like, yay,
yeah.
And then like,
and I remember like I was watching it, I'm like, what's the purpose for this? Because after I saw the bodies there, I remembered it from the campaign, but out of context, I was like, what are they going to do to these people? This kid's really cute. I know something bad's probably going to happen to this kid, but like, I don't want something bad to happen to this kid. And it's kind of like the worst like thing you could imagine, having the kid killed just as an intimidation device.
Yeah.
And to see the body of the little girl who was and it's one of those things where they got like the cutest little child voice actor. So like you're instantly endeared to this kid, and then it's just like a hanging body and never glazed over, never referenced again.
Yeah, I do like that they foreshadow it, but it kind of throws me off because they gave no context for what their purpose was.
Exactly.
And honestly, I did not, I knew that moment was going to happen, but I had no idea when I saw those people. I thought it was just generic. They're going to be sacrificed. Like, oh, you're probably just sacrificing lots of people.
That's what I was thinking too. Yeah.
And so I think it was then. So I think,
and because they say the wardrobe changed, so that's should be the thing to maybe key you in to know it.
Yeah.
And we knew that was going to happen, but it still came as a surprise. And that's what. And when I referenced Cassandra's being evil, they set up enough that you could see it coming, but like I don't think it's something that you would expect. Like I knew it was going to happen, but for someone who didn't see the show, I feel like it would come as a surprise.
And this is just good storytelling. I mean, I don't know what portion of like the writing was done by Matt or who I don't know who were like the main writers for this.
They have like a Q&A after show for everything, and so they reference who they are. I want to say it's Matt, Travis, and Sam, maybe someone else.
Okay, the idea that
and like the showrunner, like the actual like producer of the show.
Yeah, it's just insane how well. I mean, we know that they had great material to work with, but like how the thing is, this could have been really bad. They could have just like kind of copied D&D into a cartoon, and it would have been like okay-ish, like us getting to see representation of the thing that we liked. But this truly stands on its own as a very good and well-made story. Yeah. You do not have to have watched Critical Role to enjoy this. It's just good. It's just good storytelling. It tells a story that makes sense and has a conflict resolution setup. You understand motivations, why people care and matter. You see all these. It's just well done, and that's why it's so good to me. I'm like there are other shows that do a bad job of this, and this one just does it so well. And it's again, maybe it's easier. This is almost like when I was talking about Star Wars and Boba Fett. When you have good material, right? You have something that's already there a little bit provided to you. And so you just need to do the work of making a good story for it.
Yeah. You have the bones of good characters. All you need to do is weave it together in a good narrative.
Yeah. And obviously Critical Role, even easier because there's literally a story that's already told. Like it's not like you have to manifest a story, but how they translated what was literally just people playing D&D into a show. They had more room to fail, right? Boba Fett didn't have an expectation. And to say, as a critical watcher, I could have been like, oh, I'm great. I'm glad that I saw this on the screen, but like, this is just not like that good. It could have failed, but they just didn't. It's just good. Yeah. Oh, and the more I watched it, another separate thing, the better the animation got for me. In some ways, like I watched the beginning, I was like, this is pretty good. But like the more I watched, I was like, this animation is excellent. Like it's clear that they put the effort towards the parts that require it. And they just don't in parts that don't. Like I was like, they could have maybe like done a little more animating for this moment where like they all just kind of stand there. It's like a side profile and nobody moves very much. I'm like, yeah, but you don't waste time on like on displaying things like that when you have like literal fights where people are shooting giant magic bolts and stuff.
Yeah, if you criticize the animation of the show, then you're criticizing the animation style of like half of everyone's favorite animated shows from the 2000s. Like, oh, Teen Titans has bad animation. Avatar has bad animation.
Yeah, it's literally like I thought to myself, I was like, I think I was trying to find something to be critical about, and I can't even really say anything about that. So.
Just the general art direction too. It's and again, we probably talked about this already, but like the way that the characters are realized into these people, like they just like some of them are so perfectly fitting the characters that we had at least that I had in my head, and to see them realized, some of them are better than I had pictured them in my head, to be honest.
Truly, I think like Percy with the story being told, this makes me like Percy more than I ever did in the story. He was a cool character, but like he was never that significant, and like his arc was the only thing that made him truly like awesome. Like, wow, all this backstory, I'm glad we get to see you live it out. But this makes him like, wow, Percy's awesome. Like, yeah, the story of Percy is truly exceptional. It's just when we had to watch it like broken up and the breakup in the drama almost, like, there's a dramatic moments that happens this Thursday, and next Thursday I have to pick it right back up where it was, and it's just not the same. And the voice acting, obviously they're all voice actors, so there's not much to say like, oh, it was so good. But it just works so well. Like the voice acting, getting to hear them do these moments, but like true with all the real stress and like feeling is so great. Like again, better than it could have been in Critical Role, because even if they were doing their best to role play, they didn't. It's not like they were taking time and like knowing what they were going to say and like taking the moment to put the emotion into it. Sometimes it was raw. It's like, oh, they really were just feeling that. But like this is where they put on a performance. And
Yeah.
it's just perfect.
And in the show, like a lot of the ones who are putting on voices did manage to like have good dialogue and have like meaningful things that they were saying while doing a voice, and that was impressive. But now they don't have to have both things going on in their mind. They can just do the voice acting job, and so the voices come across better. Yeah. So let's talk about the love. So this is one thing where, like, honestly, I don't think I was even particularly excited to see it, but the way that they handled it wasn't bad. It felt less shoehorned in than in the D&D campaign, and that's Vax and Keyleth.
Yeah. And so I actually saw this comparison thing where it was here's the moment in Vox Machina, and here was it in Critical. It showed Critical Role first, but then it was like here's it in Vox Machina, and it really highlights how literally it came out of nowhere and nobody expected it. Like Liam, in fact, Liam said that like he just said it and he was like, I love you, right? And then Vax kisses her, and everybody's just like, what? Like Marisha hides behind her thing, like she just like doesn't know what to respond. Everybody's just like, what? Like, and it's not like it's just nobody even saw it coming. And I love that the way they translate that into the thing is that while we have the seeds being planted and we see, haha, Keyleth, and we see the foreshadowing to it, Keyleth even says, she's like, because it's the same moment. He says it in the middle of like a battle, and she basically comments on why would you say that now? This is awful timing,
and it's almost a comment on the original.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I just love how they handle it. But this is this is the same thing. Just like, Percy, like, I'm sure that there's a backstory and him and Matt work together and all of it makes sense that those things happen. But for us as the audience, it was like, oh, that just came out of nowhere. It seemed kind of forced. It was just like, whatever. Did you just make that shadow demon thing up? Like, is that real? And the same thing when Liam did it. It was like, hey, it's cool that you want to make that happen. Like making some romance or whatever happen in D&D is interesting and unique. Yeah. But it was just like, oh, okay, I guess you're just in love with her now. And Legend of Vox Machina made it make sense. It seems legitimate. They could be in love. And spoiler ahead for potentially season 2 if you haven't seen Critical Role.
I'm glad that you're touching on this because I also.
Yeah, so spoiler ahead, but they are also laying the groundwork, and I'm not even actually saying. They're laying the groundwork for another romance. In fact, they're laying the groundwork for 3 romances, including the Keyleth and Vax one, which is more obvious. And one of them might be a little more obvious than the others. But another one, I think they're putting the seeds down in a very subtle way. Not like it was not supposed to be a feature or anything about this season.
And so people who know how these things work out are privy to the knowledge and can see those details, and they're like, ooh, yes, this makes sense. I see it. Yeah, this is good.
Mm-hmm.
Last time I mentioned how I would like this to end up giving us a Mighty Nine show. And in that vein, I'd be much more excited for the Mighty Nine show to fix the romances there, because the romances in Mighty Nine are shoehorned in and kind of god awful to me. Like one of them is, I feel bad spoiling this, but there are 2 lesbians in that group. Guess what happens? They end up together as if both of them don't detail having relations and love interests outside of them, but they just end up together because they're 2 lesbians. And that kind of bothers me. And there's another romance.
They could be bisexuals.
That's never established there.
But they could be. You can't assume.
Fair. But and there's another romance that's set up, and that one, like, it wants you to think that it's sort of set up and played out, but I never felt any chemistry between those 2 characters, which is ironic considering who they're played by, but
Yeah.
I feel like the show version could fix those relationships to make them make sense to me.
Yeah. Again, this is all we're talking about. And when we say something about Mighty Nine, it's kind of a spoiler. But I also think in Mighty Nine, the relationship between the two not lesbians that develops also could have actually been fine. But like one of them, like they both did this weird like kind of not doing it thing and back and forth that maybe it was supposed to be like some kind of sexual tension maybe, but really just comes off as like, are you did you guys like decide you didn't want to do that or not? Like it just didn't feel good.
It's similar to the Vax and Keela thing in that it was one person initiated a romance and then the other person basically had to warm up to the idea of it because the other one was kind of oblivious to the other's interest. Whereas in the Mighty Nine, the other person isn't oblivious. They're basically told, and they spend like 100 episodes not thinking about it.
Yeah, like ignoring it.
Yeah,
like purposefully ignoring it. Like basically getting hit on, clearly shown interest, and then like and then like just kind of disregarding it.
And every other member of the group having a crush on that person.
Yeah,
who has the crush on this one person.
Yeah, literally, and the fact that of this like ignoring it, the way that it was handled again. If you had the similar thing in real life, if you had a person showing clear, consistent interest over like days of spending time with somebody, and that person just kind of like ignored them and didn't like disregarded it and acted like either like was actually oblivious, which is not practical, or purposefully was like just acting dumb, you would be like what happened in the show is basically they were like, oh, it just kind of seems like I'm being too much and they don't like me. And they would just move on. Like in real life, that's basically what happened. Like if you showed your interest to somebody and they just ignored it and disregarded you, you'd be like, okay, I guess they don't like me, whatever. Like, or you'd be a weird creeper and you just keep doing it. But like, in a, somebody in a generally mature person would recognize like, oh, I guess they just don't like me. Yeah. All right. You get the hint. And so for him to like spend all this time disregarding it and then one day be like, okay, I'm like ready to like you now. And it's like, all right, great. I'm glad we both love each other now. Awesome. So fun. Like, it's just, I wish that you should have just been together. Just be together. Like,
and so my frustrations with that romance give me hope that when they do the show, they can tell it a little better because they're doing that with Vax and Keyleth. I actually never really had an issue with Vax and Keyleth. And when it happened, it was like weird that it happened when it happened, but it kind of made sense to me because I was like, I could see that. Like,
yeah. And again, I would say the same thing. I would say that even though he kind of did it like that, and even if she didn't understand or know, right?
That's kind of her character, though. Her character is kind of maybe oblivious to that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And so he felt like he had to spell it out to her.
Yeah. Oh my God. And this show, just to say Legend Box Bucket, hey, I didn't really like Keyleth watching Critical Role, right? This show makes her endearing, right? Her sort of like naive, a little bit of naivete and not quite believing in herself and overcoming that, like is something people can empathize with. When you watch it in Critical Role, it just seemed like she was being a bad player, like not being helpful and being annoying and like oh yeah, it didn't come across the way I think Marisha wanted it to. And in the show, that I'm like, oh wow, Keyleth is very likable here.
I like Keyleth in the campaign, but I have heard your opinion and I've heard others echo that opinion. And so I'm glad that you like her in the show. Yeah,
everybody here has their charm and their quirks and their things to like.
Vax was my least favorite character in the campaign. And even Vax, like he feels like more of a character. Like I see the repertoire between him and Vex. I see him taking like a legitimate interest in Keela's stuff and like and we see it as like a crush thing, but like and like we get to see him interact with who's the magic shop guy? Gilmore. When we see him interact with Gilmore, it feels more like a playfulness between them. Mm-hmm. Whereas in the game, like it's easy to look at it as manipulative of trying to get a thing out of him, which it's sort of implied in the show. That's what it is. But you get a sense that Vax isn't trying to be manipulative in the show, that
Yeah.
he has a genuine fondness for Gilmore.
Yeah. And I want to say, like, another comment on maybe why Vax was not a very good character in Critical Role is really because he was a hardcore stereotype edgelord. Like, it was just like, I'm a dark, I'm a dark, mysterious rogue with some kind of chip on my shoulder, and like I talk like this. Like it was literally like it seemed, and it wasn't like there wasn't necessarily anything wrong with it. It just seemed like, and sometimes like forced or like uninteresting. And here it just seems like who he is. It seems more genuine. Like this is that character, and that makes him more just okay to watch.
Yeah,
like
Vax's role in the original show at this point is I throw a knife. Hey, Keyleth, I love you.
Yeah, dagger, dagger, dagger. That's and there's nothing wrong with that, honestly, in D&D. Like, you don't have to be a great role player. Your character doesn't have to be amazing. And to say Critical Role didn't have... I also say this, as much as we can criticize Critical Role and there should be no expectations for what they have to do, okay? They do not owe us putting on some fantastic, story. They're just people playing D&D, and we like it. Like, at this point, maybe people are like, well, we paid the money, we subscribe to their Twitch and all this. I'm like, in my opinion... we do that because we want to keep seeing them. It's, we're voting with our dollar, and whatever they give us is what they give us, So as much as I can say, I don't really like this character, or they weren't that good, or
there's always still something worth coming back to because you're watching a group of friends play D&D and have fun with each other. And that's endearing.
A group of accomplished voice actors.
Yeah.
And that now, I mean, hey, you voted with those dollars, they put all those dollars into production. Like everything looks better and seems better, and they've probably all taken time and taken it more seriously and recognize that they do maybe have some obligation, or at least they can take that upon themselves to perform better for us. And I appreciate that. I echo also that you want a Mighty Nine show in the future, and I didn't like the Mighty Nine that much overall. However, I want this to succeed very well so that we can have, I want all of it, everything that Critical Role does to eventually be a series that we can watch. I want everything. I want Mighty Nine 2. I want their third campaign that I haven't been watching hardly any of. And I want Dimension 20 and Brendan Lee Mulligan to get his, and I want Matthew Koval to get one. I want this to be like kind of a set off to more, like, the fact is that like D&D is some of the greatest fantasy content that exists, and there's so many good creators out there, so many good stories. And if Amazon and other services can recognize that this can be, I mean, D&D is already a cash cow in and of itself. If they can tap into that by just translating existing stories that with already good performances and humor.
Yeah, you already have like your main cast and your main plot. You just need to iron out. It's like adapting a book. It's like adapting anything. Like, but these things are probably a lot cheaper for you to get the rights to.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you might have to just buy it from a single guy that might even in some ways be honored to sell it to you. The thing is that there is some difficulty there because of licensing copyrights. And luckily, Taldore was already unique enough in its own ways that Matt was able to just translate it. Like, he took a lot of inspiration from Forgotten Realms. Like, there's straight ripoffs of gods, but he also in his, when he made his own book for it, translated them into a non-licensed similar version of everything.
Yeah. So let's talk about that ending and how we're setting up for season 2.
I mean, they set it up exactly how it happened in Critical Role.
Yep. And
it just, oh man, it's for anybody that doesn't know what's going to happen. It is just such a foreboding, like, what is this now?
Seeing a bunch of fucking big dragons come, like, it's so hard to not want to spoil just the tiny littlest bits, because the first episode coming back, we know what's gonna probably play out because we've seen it happen before.
Yeah.
And the very thought of that is just so enticing.
Yeah. It's perfect, man. It resolved everything. They were like, Voxocken is not only forgiven, but we, restored them the rights, or we've done this. You make some kind of again, good storytelling. You make some initiation to what's going to happen later, and
this is the
cliffhanger.
Oh, this is one hell of a cliffhanger.
Yeah. And man, yeah, it's, again, I can just say it again. this show's amazing. It's perfect.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like we've addressed enough things that it's not perfect. It's not flawless. No, you know what? That's what it is. It's not flawless, but to me, and I think to you, it is kind of perfect.
Yeah, it's perfect because it's exactly what I would have hoped for in a translation.
It's better than what I hoped for.
Like, I would like to hear somebody's objective criticism. The plot armor thing, I can see that. But I also have a counter to that. I can easily, counter that.
I do want to hear criticisms, especially of people who haven't listened to Critical Role.
Yeah.
Because we may be looking at this like through blinders, through rose-colored glasses, like everything's great.
Like, I want to hear criticisms that aren't, plot armor, which I can easily refute, or it's too crass or whatever, because I'm like, well, it's that kind of show, but it also does it in a somewhat tasteful way.
If this isn't your kind of show, that's not the criticism we're looking for. Like, if this is a show that you should like, and for some reason it disappointed you, something you didn't like about it, let us know.
I would like to. I want to hear that.
Or if you loved it, let us know. We want to hear from you guys.
Yeah, drop it in the comments below, please. But again, I only have good things to say about this show. Really glad how it all turned out, and look forward to season 2.
Indubitably.
Right. Well, I think that's all for us today, folks. So until next time, this has been Robert.
And Ryan.
Have a good one.
Good day.